I went to Stone Ridge from the time I was 5 until I graduated from high school at age 16, and that would have been basically the entire decade of the 50s. I would not be who I am were it not for Stone Ridge. Stone Ridge had a tremendous influence in my life. Aside from my parents, the Religious of the Sacred Heart were the determining influence in my life. Stone Ridge is the place I mostly experienced the education of the Religious of the Sacred Heart. What always impresses me, actually in all Sacred Heart schools, but especially here at Stone Ridge, is how the children, starting with little bitty children, have learned the 5 goals of the Sacred Heart. And they can recite them brilliantly, and they understand that they have obligations. They have an obligation to social justice. They have an obligation to intelligent action. They have an obligation to a spiritual life. They have these things that they absolutely get are essential to live a good life. When I was a child, there were no 5 goals. When I was a child, they read The Rule, and that was very different. But there was always the spirit of what became the 5 goals. You know what a Sacred Heart education is intellectual fun. You always are challenged academically and expected to perform at your peak, whatever that is. But you have a lot of fun doing it. And not only fun with the other girls, but fun with the teachers. And that's really one of the hallmarks. I'm very involved with the Sacred Heart. I have been to almost every Sacred Heart school in the United States. I feel very strongly that this is a huge part of who I am as a person. And so I make it a point to try to stay very active in things that the order is involved in and that the schools are involved in. And the schools are wonderful. Going around the country and seeing these girls just be so energized and so interesting and interested is a delight. Look, let's be frank. There are not that many Sacred Heart nuns anymore, and so it's up to us. We have to make sure that this incredible legacy of the Sacred Heart, this incredible education, this incredible sense of community and sense of obligation carries on from generation to generation. That's our job. Philippine Duchesne is one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. Not that I've met her, but she's one of the most remarkable people I've ever studied. Think about it. 1818. She comes across the ocean. She's old. She's in her 40s, which for 1818 is old. She and an intrepid group of little women come across in a terrible passage, the Rebecca they're on, and it gets twirled around at sea. There's a mutiny, there's a comet. There are all kinds of things that make it an incredible trip. They arrive in New Orleans. Now keep in mind, they were in long black silk habits, right? They get to New Orleans, it is hot. The Ursuline nuns, who have been there since 1727, say to them, please stay with us. We've got so much work to do. And they say, no, we have made a deal with the bishop. We will go to St. Louis. He is going to allow us to minister to the Indians. Now, what did they think an Indian was? I mean, what is this French noblewoman's concept of a Native American? It's Mars, but she's on her way to Mars. And she gets to St. Louis, and the bishop says, actually, you're not going to minister to the Indians, as I promised you would. And St. Louis is not going to be the gateway to the West. St. Charles is. So off she goes to this one-horse town where nothing is there. She writes to her sister at one point and says, the only oil here is bear grease, and it's disgusting. And she, within 1 week of arriving in the United States of America, sets up the first free school west of the Mississippi River. Think of that. That's incredible. And she did it. She couldn't speak the language, but a lot of people there didn't speak it either. And she was able to do that. And then she set up the private school that paid for the free school. But having to go through so much hardship to make all of that happen. We try to make sure the students do know the history, and we've had a year of a bicentennial of Philippine Duchesne arriving in America, so we really tried to get the history into them. But even if you don't know the history, you have some sense that it was not easy for women before you. And if they don't have a sense of that, we haven't done our job. Community is emphasized from the time you're a baby, that you understand that you have to contribute to the community and you're a member of the community. And that's a wonderful thing. It's very comforting to be part of a community. And it's very empowering to be able to contribute to a community. And I think that everybody wants to do that. That's something that just gives us strength. This school is a wonderful school. We live in a very different time from when we were little girls in the 1950s, and you basically had a nun with a piece of chalk and a blackboard. We live in a time when you have facilities that attract students and you bring the best students to the campus and make the school a better and better school all the time. And that's what we need to do. We need to be part of that. And that's what alums can help with, because our voices are stronger than any other voice when we talk about the importance of this education. The changes physically have just enhanced the experience. They haven't detracted from the experience in any way. I mean, when I was a little girl, this Hamilton house, this beautiful house, was the main building, and there was the one behind it, and the nuns all lived upstairs. So it was very much a family. But in my time here, the buildings expanded and we kept adding, so that there were things like chemistry labs built, which had not been there earlier. So that each step of the way, there was the attempt, and I think in most cases the successful attempt, to enhance the educational experience. It's wonderful to come back on campus. It is exciting to see all the things that have changed, but it's also wonderful to fall back into the bosom of the family and all of the things that are the same. We're talking right now in the parlor of Hamilton House. I spent a great deal of my childhood in this room. Schools take money. Schools cost a lot of money. The tuition never covers it. And we want to be sure that we have students who come here who can't afford the tuition. We not only want to provide that education for those students, but we want the diversity that makes an educational experience much more rich. And we also want to make sure that our own children can go. Some of our alums have a real stretch at being able to send their children to Stone Ridge. So we want to keep them in the family. So all of that takes our contributions. And then when you add on to that we need more facilities and more buildings built, we got to pony up. The most important education you can get, and this has really been true throughout history, but it's going to be even truer as we go into the brave new world. The most important education you can get is a good, solid, liberal arts education. You need to write and write and write and write and write. You need to know your history. You need to read and read and read and read and read. You need to know science. You need to know math. You need to know all kinds of things. You can only get that if you're in a well-rounded educational institution that understands that all of that is important, as are the values that underlie them. What we know about girls' education is that girls thrive. The whole atmosphere is such that they are the leaders. They're the editor of the paper, they're the student body president, they're the captain of the debate team, they're the captain of every sports team. And it infuses a sense of leadership and confidence that often is missing in coeducational schools. Not always, but usually. What girls in Sacred Heart schools learn is how to lead. They also learn how to follow, which is important as well. But what was remarkable in my generation was that we were taken seriously in the 1950s. That was not true for most girls, and it made all the difference of the women of my generation. The current students are active, engaged, lively, interesting, fun to be around, and smart. When someone graduates from Stone Ridge or from most all-girls schools, she is in a position to take on the world. And the only challenge is to put up with those boys.